Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast is made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Welcome to all of our listeners back to Driving the Line. Guys, we got a good podcast for you today, and we're glad that you're joining us. So wherever you're at, whether you're in your truck, in your office, at the house, no matter what you're doing, we're sure glad you're with us today, and we're sure glad that you're taking a little time to share with us. And us being Jim Seibert, Kenny Ray, and Barry Harrison, we're all in here with you today. Of course, I'm Mike Bohan. I'll be your moderator, so to speak, today. But we've got a good episode today. And what we're going to talk about is some things that affect you as a trucking company in a way that we may not think about after a crash, or maybe even after an injury or an incident. Because a lot of times, guys, I think we can all say, and all of us that are out there, all you guys that are listening to us, when we have an accident, if you've got a truck and a driver that is involved in an accident, we have things that we think about that we immediately need to take care of, right? Are there injuries at the scene? Do we need to call law enforcement? We're talking to our insurance company. We need to get statements from witnesses. We want to take pictures. All of these things that we have these immediate needs that we need to address right away. And today we want to kind of shift from that and talk about the things that affect us in the long term, post-accident or post-injury or post-incident, because it's not just a vehicle crash. I mean, I know with Jim's insight and with OSHA regulating our industry as well, this could be an injury as well. But when we talk about the things that affect us as trucking companies, we need to think about the long-term effects that some of these accidents can have on our businesses. And guys, I want to start this with a Google search that I did the other day when I was thinking about this topic. And what I Googled was long-term effects of a crash for trucking companies. That's what I Googled. And you know, the first 10 entries from that Google search were from law firms. And they weren't defense attorneys for trucking companies. They were plaintiff's attorneys. So when you Google long-term effects that a crash might have on a trucking company, the first 10 things that pop up when you Google that are lawyers out there that are wanting to come against the trucking industry. And the reason I bring that up is because I want to start with that aspect of this line of thought of when we have an accident roadside and we start getting beyond the immediate needs that we need to address, what are some things that are going to affect us? Well, just by that simple Google search, that kind of leads us down the road of there may be litigation that comes our way. There may be a claimant or a plaintiff that comes against us. So in your guys' dealings with your clients in the trucking industry, the people that you know, the trucking associations that we deal with, just based on that Google search that I did, is that something that you see that is a huge long-term effect that might come from a crash post-incident? Is this idea of, this may end up in court. This may end up with us needing to retain some kind of attorney because this is going to be something where, hey, they filed a claim with our insurance company. Somebody's claiming an injury. I mean, we see this every day, don't we?
You're exactly right, Mike. And it's so hard to predict, which ones may or may not end up in litigation. And I love the way you started the episode out by saying, hey, there's things we take care of at the time. I mean, all the stuff you mentioned. Is our driver okay? Are other people hurt? What's the damage to our vehicle? Do we have to line up towing? What about our load? If the trailer was loaded, do we need to do alcohol and drug testing? All of those things a safety director, trucking company deals with real time. And then once all of those issues get settled, we kind of sink into a lull. And a lot of times you ask, what have we seen? I've seen a lot of clients that will say, okay, I'm wondering, am I going to get sued on this? Is this going to be a lawsuit? And the longer they go without either receiving a preservation letter from an attorney or being contacted by an attorney, they start letting their guard down and they start thinking, well, maybe I'm going to be okay. And during that interim, they're dealing with adjusters, they're dealing with insurance. If their driver was injured, they're dealing with his or her health care costs, maybe OSHA reporting, all of those things. But the further they get away from the incident without being contacted by a lawyer, they start putting that more and more on the back burner. And I'm going somewhere with this because I'm fixing to ask you a question and ask Barry and Jim, who are both in Oklahoma, a question. What is y'all's statute of limitations? Mike, you're in Missouri. Jim and Barry are in Oklahoma. I'm in Texas. For us in Texas, you can file a civil suit up to 2 years after an event. So my point is, the further they get away from an incident, they start letting their guard down thinking, well, maybe this isn't going to happen. I'm probably okay. Those things I took care of right after the crash are the only things I'm going to take care of. And then a week or 10 days, or I've even seen it the day before the anniversary of the second year of the crash, they get a notification. A lawsuit has been filed in a state district court in Texas. Or for you in Missouri, how long would that be? And my two Oklahoma colleagues, what are y'all looking at on limitations on civil suits? What is it for y'all?
7 years for us in Oklahoma.
Yeah, in Missouri, it's 5. I think Illinois is 2 for personal injury, 5 for property damage. I think Kansas is 2. But regardless, guys, it doesn't matter if it's 2 years or 5 years. If you've gone 2 years and not thought about it, just like Kenny was talking about, think of all the things. I mean, I'll say me personally, if I go 2 years and I don't think about something, I forgot a lot of details. I've let a lot of things go. I mean, if I'm not thinking about it, you're not going to recall every little thing that happens. And in the meantime, in that 2 years, somebody may be building a case against you. They may be gathering evidence against you. And if you're not thinking about it, thinking about that process, it can really put you behind the 8 ball, because I know, like I said, for us, it's 5 years, and you can get into that 4.5 year, between 4.5, 5 years. And now all of a sudden you get, somebody gets served, or, a plaintiff's attorney comes about. Usually it doesn't happen that way, that as far as I can see. Usually it's a little quicker than that, but we know the game. We know that, if there's a serious accident, I've seen this over and over and over again, where if there's a serious accident, right at the scene, everything looks fine. Everybody's up, walking around, everything's, hey, we exchange information, everything's fine. And in a matter of a week, that person that was now the claimant in that crash has been contacted by a plaintiff's attorney, and now they're seeking damages, or there's bodily injury there or something like that. So it usually happens quicker, but it can happen all the way up to, depending on what state you're in, 2 to 5, 6, 7 years later, where you're still having to deal with that. And that's a long time to have something sitting on the books.
So we've talked about lawsuits here, and that's not even one of the first things that kind of pops into my mind when I think of long-term effects. There's a long, slow bleed, potentially, of financial impact, right? Higher work comp costs, medical costs associated with that employee, lost productivity. Okay, there's financial impact. What about the operational impact? We've got a staff disruption. We've got additional training costs. The morale issues of an accident that happens, or an injury that happens. An effect that may not be real apparent at the beginning is, what about your reputational damage, your public perception, or industry image, right? I tell you what, on my ag side, I was just at an event the other day where a fatality happened in a state, and that person that is the safety director for that company was there, and OSHA's in the room. And they are talking about the incident now that it's closed. And I know that man and I know that company and they're a good company, but you can't help but feel reputational damage through this. And so all of those, the legal implications, absolutely, a lawsuit or additional investigations, all of that is there. But every one of these has secondary and tertiary effects for an incident happening, and they can be long, they can be very, very immediate from the moment of the incident on. Like you said, hey, we got 2 years in, some of this stuff is done. These other items are still there.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, and Barry, I'm going to yield to you in just a second as a former safety director and operations director for a very, very good trucking company in Oklahoma. But, one thing I tell safety directors to do, if they've never been down this road, if they've never been sued, if they've never had to be deposed, is to think about if you did receive a preservation letter. And for our listeners, a preservation letter is a demand from a law firm that you hold everything static. You don't change anything about this situation. That's your driver file, your maintenance file, the truck itself, the trailer, the load. They want everything left exact. And if it was up to them, it would be held static until the day of the trial, if it goes to trial. And one thing your attorney can do, a defense attorney can push back, particularly on your equipment. If the equipment is where it can be minimally repaired and put back into service, your attorney can push back and say, hey, you'll have till this date to come and examine the truck, take pictures, do whatever you want, but we're going to put it back in service. But they'll ask you to hold everything without change through a preservation letter. But one thing I always challenge safety directors to do is imagine you are getting sued and now it's the morning of trial. And so you're looking forward in time to thinking, okay, I'm fixing to walk into a court of law in Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, or wherever, and I'm fixing to be sworn in, put on a witness stand, and I'm going to give testimony either in front of a judge or a jury. What should I do now to prepare me for the possibility that that's going to occur? And so then when you start looking at it like that, you sit and say, man, I need to get that DQ file. I need to put it a separate place, secure it. I need to run at least 30 days of his hours of service on the ELD. I need to grab the maintenance file on that truck and trailer and put it under lock and key with that DQ file. I need to get all of these items together. I need to reach out to an attorney and say, hey, do we need help on this or whatever? My point is, and the reason I posed my original question about what y'all statute of limitations was, a lot of times the further they get away from the incident and haven't heard from a plaintiff's attorney, they start thinking everything's back to normal, and then wham, they get served and they haven't done any of those things that they should have done. And then it's pure disastrous for them. I mean, it's almost unovercomable at that point, because the court is going to grant that plaintiff's attorney permission to ask or subpoena certain documents, and you're not going to have them, or they're going to be changed. And it can just be disastrous. And Mike, you mentioned it's not always based on the severity. I mean, I've seen very minor crashes like you and Barry have, where the people are up walking around. There may even be minor damage to the vehicles. And a week or 10 days later, the next thing you know, somebody is suing you and claiming this person has spinal injuries and everything else. And then I've seen other ones where there's catastrophic damage to the vehicles, and it never ever ends up in a lawsuit. And the point about that is there is no ironclad, sure-fast way to predict which ones may or may not end up in litigation. And so a prudent, and one thing we always share on here, what are best practices? Best practices, and Jim, you're an old military guy, best practices is to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And, I've just seen so many trucking companies that lose any sort of leverage or advantage they possibly could have by not properly preparing for something that may come and be absolutely catastrophic for them.
Yeah, Kenny, you said that just beautifully. What I always like to term when I was doing the safety director and operations stuff, it was, my staff, I would always kind of prepare them when we would have any accident at all. It's always prepare for the document dump because that's what's coming. I remember the last one I got was the demand was 3 pages long and they're going to ask you for things that you're not even necessarily going to think about preserving at the time. So again, this goes back to a have a good relationship with your producer, whoever it is that's working on the insurance side, to where you can have these candid conversations about what do I do if, even with ELD providers, you need to have a good relationship with someone there that you can say, hey, I need to preserve this stuff for this long because here's the statute of limitation. I need to be as prepared as I can possibly be if this letter does come. And, it's one of those things that I unfortunately had to kind of learn as I went. And, after it's happened to you a few times, you definitely become more adept at that process and what they're going to ask for and things like that. But again, to me, it goes back to preparing before it happens and making sure you've got some kind of process in place from the people who, provide different services for you.
We're not pushing any one firm, any one lawyer, any one person, anything like that. But if you've got a serious accident, it's best to, get some advice. Yeah, absolutely. From the folks from your insurance company, things like this. But if you've got that feeling like, yeah, this could turn into something, it's best to reach out to an attorney and let them walk you through this process and let them say, okay, here's the things we should or shouldn't retain. And then everything then goes through them instead of you having to deal with this, and they can walk you through that process. Now, guys, Jim, you had mentioned this, and I want to talk about this a little bit because we're in the insurance world, right? We're safety guys that work in the insurance world, but you'd mentioned the financial impacts, and this comes in a lot of different ways, direct and indirect cost of claims. We've talked about this before. We've got some of those direct costs like replacing the equipment, maybe hiring another driver if one's injured, out on an injury, things like that. But I want to touch base on this because we are in the insurance world. When we're talking about an accident that happens, we've got a claim out there that does drag on for a while because there are demands being made by a third party, things like this. What happens in that instance is the insurance company is now going to place some reserves on this accident. And that's money that's set aside in the event that they would have to pay out on this claim, right? Well, if you continue to go on and this drags out a year, drags out 2 years, whatever, you've got these reserve dollars sitting there. That's going to affect your renewal when it comes around. If it hasn't been settled, if it's a claim that hasn't been settled, if it just drags on and on. So when we talk about a big expense for trucking companies, what they pay in insurance, what you guys that are listening to us, what you're paying in insurance premium can be greatly affected by a serious claim or a serious accident that's dragging on year after year after year. So that's something that, as we're talking through this, is a financial impact for you as a trucking company. It's one thing to have a claim and the insurance company pays that out, and your loss ratio is high and your rates go up, whatever. I mean, we don't get into that stuff, but I do know that, if you've got a claim that drags on and it doesn't get settled, it happens in 24 and they don't settle it and it's drug into 25 now and maybe into 26 because we just can't get it settled. That money that the insurance companies set aside is something that is going to go against you when companies are looking at you for renewal. So I think that's an important thing that you guys know, that it can't happen because it's, a lot of times when that happens, it may not be just, $10, $15, $20,000. It may be a policy limit claim or a policy limit demand. And now we're talking $1 million. It could be $5 million. It could be, any number of different demands that these plaintiffs' attorneys would come up with. So I think it's important that we kind of talk about that because that's the world we live in. That's the world we see on the insurance side. And and when we talk about the long-term effects, that's why it's so important. And all the things that we talk about on this podcast and you guys do as trucking companies to avoid not just those catastrophic crashes where the truck's totaled, trailer's totaled, but any crash, any incident, whether it's the low speed, low impact type or a high speed crash on the highway, they can all get you in this point where it has long-term, long-lasting effects against your company. A lot of times that's in the financial realm, but it's unfortunate, but we see it every day.
And Mike, right now we're all kind of talking about crashes, but you just mentioned it can be things other than crashes, and we always call on Jim as our OSHA guy because that's his strong suit from our podcast team. But Jim, the three of us on the trucking side, and again, we don't talk about specific companies or individuals or anything, but we have all seen phenomenally large worker comp claims from truck drivers that were either walking across a Caliche Rock truck stop parking lot, or that slipped getting in and out of the tractor, or if they're a tanker outfit, slipped on a ladder on a tank trailer and tore out a knee, ripped a hip, a shoulder, or something like that. And there are long-term consequences of that, not only covering the medical, the expenses itself, but there's OSHA reporting requirements that go on. And OSHA is very specific about how you count days that people are away and when the counting starts and what you do if it rolls over a calendar year. We're in 2025 now, but we just came out of 2024 a couple of months ago. And what if somebody had got injured in the middle of December 2024 and that injury continues into 2025? And the point I'm making here, Jim, and I want to yield to you, and I'm not asking you to quote regs or standards out of OSHA, but the point is every opportunity we get to stress to these trucking companies, hey guys, you may not realize it, but you are under OSHA. And those are the kind of things that can bring them under OSHA scrutiny, is injury reporting and properly maintaining the OSHA forms, the injury and illness reporting forms, and all of those things. So, I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this idea about what long-term effects of incidents are is not strictly limited to crashes involving our trucks. It can be something catastrophic that happens to our driver, something that happens in the shop, even to an office employee. And so and safety directors for trucking companies, you got to start thinking about more incidents than just crashes involving your trucks on the highway.
Kenny, to add on to that, an important thing that, we're talking insurance changes here and that employee that's outside of the truck when an injury occurs. There's such a thing as a DART rate. There is a RIFR. There is a ticker. These are formulas that OSHA's got out there for safety metrics calculated. And I'm just throwing some general numbers here, but how often reportable incidents happen per 100 employees or per 20 or per 50. So these rates are calculated. And now that we've got the online reporting and some companies qualify for public disclosure, you better know that a carrier is going to request those report numbers for those specific rates. And that's a factor. That's a factor on whether or not what your premiums are, or if they even want to insure you further. And so, that there's a direct correlation between injuries and the frequency of those injuries that paints a picture for the carrier on, okay, what type of operation are they running? And is this somebody that we want to get involved with, knowing that they've got an injury, say from 2024, they're going to carry over to 2025 and we're going to have to deal with, 2022 and 23, they've got 20 employees and they're having 3 significant injuries a year. Yeah, that they don't want to get involved.
You mentioned that the insurance carriers reach out, request that. Y'all know I came out of the hazmat world. The tanker industry is very used to their customers and again, we don't name names on here, but the customers that the tanker industry pull for are the largest chemical and oil and gas companies in the world. I mean, you think about whose banner is flying over your local gas station, some tanker outfit is hauling for that bunch. And what that bunch does, these huge petrochemical companies, they ask for those numbers from the motor carrier because they want to know, because that refinery, they're very used to the OSHA because they have to keep up with all the OSHA records for their employees. So they expect a trucking company to be able to produce those records. And so oftentimes you have clients, and a lot of times they're using these third-party, these vetting services, these online outfits that a trucking company has to log in and list all of their OSHA rates and their injuries and all of those things. And the point is, this entire podcast is about what are the long-term potential consequences of incidents. And the fact is, you can have an OSHA injury that has nothing to do with a truck crash, and it end up being a headache for months, if not years, for some safety director. And the point I want to make about that, Jim, is so few trucking company safety directors have your level of expertise in OSHA that if they get off into that, just like Mike mentioned, if they're involved in serious litigation from a truck crash, they ought to probably seek some outside help, some counsel. I would challenge the very same thing. If they have a serious OSHA injury and they don't understand OSHA, they better ask somebody that does, so they can make sure they do those calculations correctly, they prepare the reports correctly, because they, not only is the insurance company going to ask for that, but their customers may be asking for. And Barry, I know y'all pulled some Department of Defense loads when you were at your previous carrier. Even the federal government can reach out and ask for those kind of documents. So again, what we're trying to do here is expose our safety directors, our motor carriers, to think there may be long-term consequences when all you really hardly ever think about is, what do I need to do right now in terms of this crash or this injury? We want you to realize part of your responsibility may be weeks, months, even years down the road after the incident occurred, whatever it was.
I want to bring this aspect up because it's weaved in with what you guys are talking about here, and and I want to just shine a light on this. Let's talk about the person that's involved in the accident, the employee that's involved, the person that's driving the truck, the person that gets injured, something like this. Because Jim, you'd mentioned this when you were talking earlier, but there's long-term effects that can happen to an individual as well, right? Now, we have done a podcast. We had a special guest come on, and we've done a podcast on mental health before. So if you guys haven't listened to that, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that podcast. But one of the things that can happen, and I've seen this happen, and I'll specifically relate this to truck drivers, is they're involved in a serious accident, and not to, I'm not even going to create a scenario. I'm just going to say they're involved in a serious accident. And due to that accident, what they experienced in that accident, they survived this accident, but it caused long-term effects for them psychologically. They never really do get over it, because as Kenny was saying, and we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, there's things that happen at the scene, and we want to take care of that stuff. We want to take care of our driver, that kind of thing. But don't forget about the long-term effects that your driver may be experiencing, because I've seen drivers over the years that ultimately have to quit driving because of what the trauma that they receive psychologically, just mentally. They can't get back in the truck, or they try to, and they just say, no, I thought I could, but I can't get back in this truck because of what I've seen or what I've experienced. And that's something that you need to be aware of as well. And again, we've talked about a lot of different things in this podcast and reaching out for help. And if you don't feel equipped to help your driver in that, reach out to somebody who is, and get your driver some help there, get your employees some help there, because that's a real thing that I see happen often. And that's a terrible thing for someone to have to go through, regardless of what the details of the accident were. But it could stem from physical injuries that they receive. It could be psychological from the crash itself was so traumatic. But that's something that can last for years and years with somebody as well. And you want to make sure that you're in tune with your folks enough to know that if somebody is having trouble with that, that you get them some help, that you reach out to them, that you can help them. And again, we're not all experts in that area, but I do recommend you go back, you listen to our podcast on mental health. We'll have to put in the description. I can't remember the episode number that it was, but we can put that in the description so you can go back and check that out as well. But it was a two-parter with some great information in it. But remember that it's that you want to make sure that your company's whole and you protect your company. But the biggest part of your company, your greatest asset that you've got, are the folks that are driving your trucks up and down the road, or the employees that you have in your shop, or the people that are working for you. You want to make sure that you're protecting them as well and making sure that they're whole. So that's something that is we've been talking today. You know, there's a lot of things that we can say long term. This is going to affect our business. This is going to affect our company. But there's really, to me, when you start thinking about things that get affected long term, it's the thing that's most important is we look at the human aspect of it. We look at the folks involved, and we make sure that we're helping them through as well. I'm sure you guys have seen that on your end as well, and it's something that I wish we didn't see, but it's certainly part of these serious accidents that we see up and down the road. So.
And Mike, I'd like to see motor carriers address that very issue at safety topics. You know, one of our colleagues on this podcast, Barry has got an excellent program he does on being your brother's keeper. I've had the privilege to sit through it twice, and you know, Barry talks to these drivers. It's designed for drivers. It's not designed for the motor carrier bosses. It's for drivers. And you know, Barry's got a CDL. He comes from a driving background, and he stands up there in front of those men and women and says, you know, guys, we have to look out for each other. We truly have to be our brother's keeper. It's very moving. It's very emotional. And I wish more motor carriers, and I'm, you know, obviously we can't send Barry to every single trucking company in the U.S., but I wish they would all at some point address that very issue of the mental health, the psychological part of this job, you know, the toll it takes on drivers if they're involved in traumatic incidents, and think about that and realize these men and women are not robots. I mean, trucking companies look at them as basically revenue producing, you know, employees, but they are men and women with dreams, hopes, fears, goals, ideas. They come with all their baggage and all their strong points as well. And you know, I hope trucking companies will always remember the human side of this business, because without those men and women, you know, we're not to the point of autonomous trucks being practical yet. And so without those men and women, you just got a bunch of expensive equipment sitting out on a yard collecting dust. And, you know, the real heroes in this industry that we all love so much are those drivers. They are absolutely critical. In fact, you could almost do away with every other job at a trucking company, but you cannot do away with drivers and still have a trucking company.
Yeah, there's not a thing we do, not a thing we touch on a daily basis that we get if we don't have those folks. Everything, our lives, our livelihood, everything we do, it's we owe those folks a lot. So,
Yep.
And Barry, I you know, we may have to cook something up there. Do a little My Brother's Keeper podcast or something here in the near future. So I think that might be a good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, you know, and just to kind of reiterate what Kenny said, it's, and what everybody said, you know, there's such a human aspect here. And that's, I always try to put myself in that perspective. If I ever had an accident or, you know, had a driver who did, you always have to remember that human aspect of it, where they didn't set out that day just hell bent on having an accident, right? And so there's a little bit of grace that comes with it while you're doing everything you can, like Mike said, to preserve all the good for the company. You still have that human resource that definitely needs to be taken care of as well. And sometimes it's easy to get away from that, kind of like Kenny said, but at the end of the day, that's somebody's mama, that's somebody's daddy, that's somebody's brother, sister that is out there, you know, having to deal with those things. And we always need to keep that in mind.
So, Mike, we always try to offer best practices. So, what would you say as we get close to wrapping up? What would you say if there's a safety director or the owner of a small company listening to us right now on this podcast, and they haven't thought through that long-term consequences of either crashes or serious injuries? You know, what would you suggest in terms of how do they get up to speed? What are some resources they could use? I mean, the first thing comes to my mind is, you know, is reach out to a safety professional that knows what they're doing, or get involved in your state trucking association. But, you know, what comes to mind if somebody's sitting out there and saying, okay, I'm listening to this podcast and I'm deficient in this area. I have a gap. How do I close that gap?
Well, to me, Kenny, the thing that I would say is you got to be proactive in this, because all of this stuff that we're talking about dealing with long term, if we're not prepped for it, then it's going to be that's the whole point of our conversation, is if we're not prepared for this, it's going to go bad for us. So a couple of things you just mentioned. One, getting in touch with a safety professional that knows regulatory issues, knows things that you're going to need to know, whether it's the FMCSA, OSHA, PHMSA, those kind of things, so you are prepared. I'll say this, we mentioned this before, and again, we're not promoting anybody, but if you can somehow through your networking have a good trucking defense attorney that you could call when something like this happens, I don't think that's a bad thing. The third thing is, and this is in the part of being proactive, is one of the things that's going to help with this is get involved with your state's trucking association. One of the things that the two things we just mentioned, where if you reach out to a safety professional, defense attorneys, things like this, your networking within that organization is going to help you in that area. When I sat at a Council of Safety Supervisors meeting in the state of Missouri with the Missouri Trucking Association, it's full of safety professionals. There's defense attorneys there, the highway patrols there, the FMCA. You got the regulatory bodies there, but you got folks there that can help you as well. So get prepared with the folks that you can network with first, and then start going through that process with them of, okay, one, I want to make sure that we feel comfortable that we are sound in a regulatory manner. And, Kenny, you're talking about the things that the preservation of documents, things like that. You mentioned driver qualification files, hours of service records will need to be maintained, maintenance records. Well, if we're going to maintain that stuff, I think it should be right. If it's something that we feel like we're going to have to present to someone later, let's make it where it's in compliance with the regulations. So that's something that I would, in being proactive to prepare for this is, whether it's having somebody come in and do a mock audit, you do an internal audit for yourself, but we're making sure that we are sound in our regulatory compliance. I think that's going to be of utmost importance. As you go through this, when you have an accident, to be prepared for this. And Barry had mentioned this through our conversation today. Whoever your insurance provider is, your producer, if they've got safety folks, be very, very communicative with them, because they're going to help you through this process. And make sure that's right up front. I guess what I'm saying is, don't ever feel like I'm just going to handle this myself. You need help when this happens. You are going to need help.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong when you reach out and ask for help. Everybody needs help, whether that's an attorney, a safety professional, your insurance professional. Reach out to these folks that deal with this on a daily basis and talk to them on a frequent basis to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. Because sometimes, things do get drawn out. I saw a thing the other day. I mean, accidents, they do happen. And I saw this phrase that says, sometimes you're Randy Johnson, sometimes you're the bird. And if you guys are baseball guys, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you're the bird. Sometimes you get nailed out of nowhere, and you got to deal with whatever comes your way. Reach out to those professionals that are in your network and make sure that they're helping you walk through the process. I think that's the biggest thing I can recommend.
I got nothing to add to that, Mike. And Kenny, I think that's a pretty exceptional list of items preventative measures, yeah, early intervention, um, making sure that your company's got a return to work program, open communication, add those items to the list that Mike and Kenny just shared there.
And the last thing I'll add is just, if you're not sure, just like Mike said, I want to just reiterate, if you're not sure, reach out and ask. If you're not sure on how the work comp process looks, things like that, it's a two-way street. You want to be honest with the people who are helping you, and then just be open and communicative to that employee to say, hey, I'm not exactly sure. Let me find you the correct answers, because information is key, but making sure that it is the correct information is superior. And we need to make sure that we're always, above board when it comes to these things, make sure that everything is accurate. And that's my 2 cents for the best practices.
There's 4 of us on this podcast right now that have learned many things through the school of hard knocks. Like it didn't come with an instruction manual. Like my dad said that to me when I had my first child. Jim, they don't come with instruction manuals, right? So we sometimes we had to figure things out as we were going through it. And that's not the time. And that's the point of this podcast today. It's that we now, having years under our belt and having loads of experience in these, we're telling you, start the process before you're in it. Start the learning, start the gathering, put your list of contacts together. And when it comes time, you're already going to be stressed enough. You're already going to have enough stuff going through your head. So if you've got a plan, execute it. You're going to be way ahead of some of the things we had to learn the hard way.
Well said. Gentlemen, I appreciate your input today. You guys always bring so much to the table, and I know the folks that are listening to us appreciate you as well, because this is a serious topic, and sometimes we get things get a little quiet, when I'm sure when you guys are listening to us out there on the road, because we're talking about something that is very impactful to your business or your life, but that's the industry we work in, and I appreciate you guys here in the studio that you're willing to share your expertise and your thoughts and to help the folks that are listening to us. So, well, everybody listening to us, next month is Distracted Driving Awareness Month. That's what we're going to be talking about in our next episode. So I encourage you to check back in with us and check out what we've got for you next month. That's always a good topic for discussion. It's something that is very important, and we talk about a lot within our group. So please come back and join us next month when we're discussing Distracted Driving Awareness Month and how we can combat distracted driving out there on our roadways. And I'll just tell you all that are listening, thank you for what you do. As Kenny was saying earlier, there's just not much that we can do in this country without you all, and we sure appreciate you. We sure appreciate your hard work and everything that you do. Please be safe out there on the road. Keep up the good work, and we're right here in your corner as always. So once again, thanks for everything that you do, and please join us next time right here on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.